Welcome to our session. The aim of this roundtable is the discussion of the relation between the housing policies of the city, of your cities, and the initiatives that were presented, of the projects that we, or the organizations that we have heard now. So the Cooperative from Vienna and the Community Land Trust from Brussels. Maybe we start with Vienna first. We would, my first question would be, what are the, let's say, main objectives related to housing policy in Vienna? And what are the main actors, or how is your organization Wiener Wohnen embedded in this housing policy?
Well, my company Wiener Wohnen is the owner and caretaker of the 220,000 municipal housing flats, which is one sector of the subsidized housing in Vienna. The other sector is the subsidized sector, where the owners of these buildings are non or limited profit companies. We have about 60 companies in that field. And the main target of the Viennese housing policy is to create sufficient affordable homes for the Viennese population, and to create a social mix all over Vienna, in every district and even in every housing complex. That's one of the main targets of the Viennese housing policy. And to get to this target, the income limits are very high in Vienna. So a broad spectrum of the Viennese population has access to affordable and subsidized housing. And that's one of the reasons for this huge social mix we have within our city, and that's one of the important points for the success of our housing policy.
Thank you. So what is how does the Kohlenrutsche project fit into this housing policy? What is let's say, general role of the cooperative housing in relation to the rest of the, let's say, options that you are offering? And what does this specific project, how does this specific project fit in? What could you offer to the project, and what did it give back, basically, to the housing policy?
Well, as Mrs. Urbanek pointed out, co-housing needs a lot of engaged people with an identical vision of living together. So co-housing is a valuable niche in Viennese housing, but it's a niche. With Vienna is investing each year about 450 million euros for housing purposes only. Every year, about 7,000 units are constructed in Vienna. So it would be impossible to create most of these people in a way these co-housing projects are created. It's a valuable niche, as pointed out, but it's a niche.
Maybe now to you, to Katharina. How did you fit in? How important was for your project the general framework of the housing policy, and what was how did your objectives, let's say, fit into the general?
Well, as I think already pointed out during the talk, and also answering the questions, I think a project like that would not be possible in Vienna without the support of the city of Vienna. So we're really like relying on these frameworks, even though some issues somehow, as I said, I mean, there is no like definite track of subsidization, especially for community housing projects. So we also somehow had to deal with a little bit absurd regulations that we had to fulfill, since we were like in the same row as a student home, for example. Fire regulations really costed a lot of money, which doesn't really make any sense. And since we've been living there for the last 2.5 years, I think the fire department had to come, I don't know, 15 times or something because of wrong alarms. And this is also something that has to be somehow addressed because it costs a lot of public money. In the end, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. And I want to add something also to what Mr. Schantl said. I know that this is really, like Vienna is really like internationally known for this long tradition of social housing and also of this very like broad approach to social housing, which was pointed out. But I still think it's not just a niche like this project somehow, that like some curiosity within the housing market or so. But I think this project really have a bigger role. I think there's one part of this role is that there are a lot of learnings from these more experimental projects that are actually like transferred to the regular social housing projects, or as it was said, there are like these two different like municipal housing and social subsidized housing. But in Vienna, for example, in 2009, social sustainability became one of the like 4 columns of quality criteria that a project has to fulfill to get funding, subsidization. Exactly, and this was due to some like pilot projects or prior projects that have already like targeted this issue of social housing. And today, like a lot of these like normal projects or like these broad projects, they are integrating a lot of ideas of community housing projects. So there's common spaces almost in every new build project. There is also something like a social software, like a moderation or like a social worker who is at the place for the first, I don't know, 1 or 2 years, and to help the inhabitants to get organized a little bit within the house for those who want to engage. So I think these are a lot of ideas coming from like projects like ours and are transferred into the regular. And I think this is a really important role that we shouldn't negate somehow. Yeah. And there's one more argument, I think, also, that like seeing this broader picture is that this kind of projects also really take some load off the public sector. You know, I mean, we're integrating, you know, refugee families within our house. We're having this kindergarten. So these are all really, duties of the public sector, more or less, that we are, through our engagement, of course, we can afford that to invest that kind of engagement into this project. I think this is also like one criticism, that you need to be able to have the time capacities and I don't know, like the vocabulary maybe, or I don't know, you know, this personal capacities to be able to be integrated or to participate in such a process. But we try to give as much back and open this as much as possible to a broader group.
Yeah, I was interested in that. So, Mr. Schantl, do you agree with the role that Katharina mentioned, that basically this is a kind of laboratory kind of for also transferring some innovative practices into the, let's say, mainstream, the larger part of the social housing?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's very important what is done there. But it has a very long tradition. It has a tradition for more than 100 years now, because from the very first municipal housing projects on, kindergartens, schools, libraries, community spaces, that was part of every project. And in municipal housing, in average, less than 50% of the field area is erected. The rest is green fields, playgrounds for children, recreation zones. So that has a very long tradition, and for sure the regulations always can be improved. And I hope we'll get to a point where projects like that of Mrs. Urbanek will can develop easier than it was in this example. But my personal opinion, I wouldn't I wouldn't have the time and the engagement and the power to bring myself in so intensively in a housing project. I want to come home and have my peace. So that's the reason why I said it's a niche. It's an important niche, and we have about 30, as far as I know, in Vienna already, and there will come more than those as we already have.
Thank you very much. So now to Brussels, Mr. Lejuste, same question for you. So how is your what is the, let's say, the general aims or the background of the housing policy in Brussels, and what's the role of your organization in this framework?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Do you hear me? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Yes. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to this meeting. It was very interesting, and so it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. Regarding your question, so the main goal of Brussels housing is to make possible for every citizen to live in a good quality and affordable housing. The right to adequate housing is written in the Belgian constitution, and it is also one of the priorities of the government. The population in the Brussels capital is growing, and there is an increase in poverty. As a result, the number of households who can ask for social housing becomes higher. Also, due to the rising prices in the real estate, it is also more and more difficult for the people to become owners of the housing. The Secretary of State in charge of housing has developed an housing plan. This plan contains 33 actions which aim to find a solution for the housing problems. And one of the partners of this plan is CLT Brussels for the creation of affordable housing in the region. However, I think that the problem of housing is really a global problem. So the CLT Brussels is only a part of the solution, but for sure we have to find a mix of solutions. So the CLT Brussels is really an original way to find a solution for affordable housing. However, it's limited in capacity, so we cannot create a thousand of projects. So we must stay realistic. And so that's really important. But I think that the CLT Brussels is really a key role in the objectives of the Secretary of State, because the projects developed by the CLT Brussels are really interesting. And also the CLT Brussels make more than just creating affordable housing. They try to create a community within the inhabitants, but also with the neighborhoods. And that's really a key factor of success, I think. So that's I do not know whether it was clear or not, but if you have some questions, do not hesitate to ask them.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Thibault, you can also explain your, let's say, your relation, or how did you, your organization, how did CLT Brussels find the let's say interaction and the framework that this housing policy offers, and what was the role of this Brussels housing organization and or other public actors? We've heard about the subsidies, but how did you get to there?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thanks for your comment and your message. So I must say that with Brussels Housing, which is the administration that works for like affordable and quality housing for the people of Brussels, the relationship is really good. And since a few years, we have been involved in some partnerships, like in the Calico project that we have shown. Within the framework of the Brussels housing agencies, I must admit, because the objective today is to share our experience, that it's not like a piece of cake to create a new organization and to be accepted and to be welcomed by everyone. And that's really normal because all the actors have those specificities, and when someone new emerge is always looked a little bit like, okay, where is he going? Is he going on our territory or another territory? And so that's really, we've developed very strong partnership with some of our partners, like the Fonds du Logement. So in Brussels, there is a housing funds that help people to get credit. And that organization helps the people with the low income to get a credit to buy a home. And they also develop new homes for these people. And so this organization is really strong and developed in Brussels. And in the first years of our activity, that really gave us a very, very, very helpful hand, because they work in close collaboration with us, and that was really, really necessary. But we also could see that we were not the priority, which is very normal because they have a lot of hundreds and hundreds of homes to build. And so that was not so easy to have a so close cooperation. So we tried to diversify our partners, and we knocked at many doors, like with other Brussels agencies that work with public funds. And we didn't find the very specific partnership that could be like the win-win. And so we try to build ourselves the homes to develop our own expertise and skills. And maybe that's not the most efficient way of doing, because in Brussels there are like the social housing agencies, there is the housing funds I spoke about, there is an agency called CityDev, there is now the CLTB. And so all these actors have to become specialists in public tenders, in construction works, in architecture. And maybe that would not be the best way to do it, but it's the way we have developed in Brussels. And I must say that I'm very glad that we can do it, but if we had to start from a blank page, do we say that? From nihil, maybe that would be really interesting to think about an actor that can get all these specialization, and work together hand in hand and by hand with the different public organizations. And about the support of the public, I told that the administration of Brussels has been always very supportive, but with the public authorities, it can depend from one minister to another one, from one government to another one. And so now we are really, really glad and happy because the actual Secretary of State of Housing really wants to make things develop. And as Tom said, there is a huge emergency housing plan, and we are part of it, and we are really glad about this. But maybe in 5 to 10 years, there will be other Secretary of State of Housing and other priorities. And so it's not easy to develop a path for growth when we don't know in 2 years where you will be.
Stability is an issue also for you.
Yeah, sure. But we work on that with the, so I really must say that today we are really glad about the administration and the Secretary of State, but it's still an issue that if you are thinking about creating something similar in other cities, maybe think about stability long term and so on.
We are very aware with that, unfortunately. Before I give the opportunity to the public, one more question to Katharina, because you all opened this issue now. I was really interested before to hear that you managed to get a non-profit project developer. How is it? We are fascinated by these huge ecosystems that you have at disposal. We are not really familiar with this role. So what is the background of this non-profit project developer? What does this organization do otherwise, or what kind of projects does?
Okay, so as Christian Schantl just pointed out, there's this one part of the social housing sector in Vienna that is like run by this limited cooperatives, actually, or some of them are cooperatives, some are other kind of societies, but non-profit, and they are subsidized by the city of Vienna to create their housing project. So it's I think 60 companies you were mentioning. And like, for example, this one that we are cooperating with, it's called Österreichisches Volkswohnungswerk. It was their first community housing project. So they had no experience, and it was some kind of coincidence somehow that we met. I mean, they, in the area of this former train station, all the land used to belong to the train, the Austrian Railway Service, ÖBB. And it was part of the urban planning and the zoning procedure that some special uses like Romanian Orthodox Church and also a community housing projects were somehow implemented in this zoning procedure as a wish from the city planning department. Exactly, and I mean this non-profit developer like bought part of this land, and as part of the contract, he somehow inherited us as a project, and we were somehow at hand somehow to realize this project with the developer. But I think now they're open for realizing more than just one community housing project. And there are other like developers like Schwarzertal, like other cooperatives more or less that are somehow focusing on this niche, and one cooperative was even created especially for the support of community housing projects in Vienna.
So they're the developers that themselves went through the process, in this way learned somehow, and now they're helping others.
Okay. So it was also really like an adventure for them. We had to convince somehow that we are a reliable partner, both as an architectural office, but also as a group, to work with a group of people. I think it's really something that normally these developers, they're not used to, of course.
Yeah. Now, to the public, I have for a few questions. Also to this, of course, to the city representatives. Yeah, Masha. Yeah. No.
Yeah. I was just wondering, because it was kind of implied, and what does this mean for you, Katharina, like on a daily level? How does this community involvement, does it burden you, or what does it mean for your everyday life? Does this being in such a community project?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have to say, yeah, it's one of the construction sides of my personal life. Like, there's a job, there's a family, there are my social relations, and the project is another part of my life. So of course, it is a conscious decision somehow to invest some of your time in that, and maybe not into your career, or I don't know, other things. But I mean, Austria is also very proud of like a huge amount of voluntary work. So I think there's a lot of people are engaged in one or the other project, in non-profit thing. So I think this is for me the way I engage in some kind of civic responsibility. And I mean, of course, it demands a certain amount of hours per month or something. We even agreed that like we wrote down it's going to be 12 hours a month or something, that every member of the association is somehow investing in this project in the long run. We're not controlling that or noting that down or something, but it's just like somehow giving us an orientation. But on the other hand, it's really also, I'm getting so much back, or we as a family, I'm living there with my 2 kids and my partner, and we're getting back so much that it's also, yeah, you could also like calculate in some kind of monetary way or something. Yeah, I don't have to pay a babysitter because my children can sleep like in the 4th floor with their friends. Or I don't know, now we were in this Corona quarantine or so, and my kids actually didn't want to leave anymore because I don't know, there were like presents and chocolate in front of our door, like, I don't know, every 2 hours in the first day. So it's really, I mean, this is just symbolic, but it's really also, yeah, it's also helping a lot in like the normal situations. I think that, I mean, I can only talk from the perspective of this like family position, and I feel like that, like in general, the pressure of like, I don't know, getting your career and your personal life and this care work in tune, it's also increasing somehow, like pressure is increasing in a lot of realms of our life. And I think this is like one possible answer also, like these projects provide one possible answer to reduce also this kind of pressure.
Thank you. Any other question? So maybe to the city representatives?
Maybe I can continue. Yeah. For Brussels, I was wondering what made you decide at this point then to back a community land trust, which is something relatively new to Europe and really not something we're familiar with. Maybe also from what Thibault was saying, are there any plans to make it more systemic, so to make it more long-term?
So thank you for your question. So what regards and the high story of the CLTB, I think that Thibault already explained it. But so the CLT was first recognized by the government in 2013. So it was already a few years ago. However, the legal framework is fairly new. So it's only since 2021 that there is a real legal framework especially dedicated for the CLT. So before there were already subsidies and so on for the CLTB, but now from last year, and we made it, and we write it in a legal framework, which make it possible for the CLTB to be to get more guarantees about the future. So, for example, from last year, the CLTB is now accredited, and so it's a guarantee for the CLT Brussels. Furthermore, the decree that we have realized is also a security what regards the subsidies of the CLT Brussels. So I think that it has been there have been several steps, and now we have found a legal framework that that is suitable for the government, for the region, but also for the CLT Brussels. So I think that it has been a path with several steps. So if for sure it has been a long time before we find a real solution to this problem. So I do not know if I have answered to your question, but if it was not clear, do not hesitate to ask me.
But I think yes. It's, so if I understood correctly, now it's basically it's part of the system. It's the systemic solutions has been established now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So before there was no decree. It was just written in the Brussels Housing Code, but now there is a real legal framework. So and this legal framework offers a guarantee for the CLT Brussels. So the CLT Brussels has got some rights, but also some obligations because of this decree.
Thank you very much. I think for me it's interesting, let's say, to hear that despite the fact that there was no legal framework before, it was possible to realize the project under specific conditions in a way. So before also we heard that like you have been operating a little bit on let's say conditions that are not meant to let's say subsidize your kind of project. So I think this is very interesting for us also to hear, because we are also Slovenia operating in a framework which does not allow now for let's say cooperative housing to develop in a systemic way, but somehow we have to find other solutions. And despite the fact that there has been more than a decade of an effort to establish these conditions, yeah, I would be interested yet maybe
Yeah.
to explain
Yeah,
a
about
little
this,
bit.
if I can explain a little bit, the idea, to answer also your question, at the beginning of the CLTB, the idea of the Brussels region, the Brussels authority, was also that, like Tom said, the problematic of housing is very complex, and so there is no one good solution, and it's interesting to create a mix of solutions. And about the acquisitive social housing, so the home ownership social housing, there was really very, very few or nothing that was done. So the idea was, why not try to make something like the CLT? And the Brussels region has been very cautious. So they start by doing a feasibility study. And if the feasibility study was positive, we could give a small subsidy and then another one. And we developed by trial and errors. And another way of doing the same thing is maybe the way the France, our neighbors from France did, is to create the framework first, the legal framework, but so that took really, really much time, because I think it's also important to have the examples. And so for the people from France who tried to convince and to create a legal framework, that was very difficult for them to convince the political authorities, because there was nothing created, that was just theoretical and ideas. And so when they finally came to Brussels to see what we are doing, that helped them a lot. So they did it maybe in a more traditional way. First, we think about the legal framework, and when that framework is really set up and solid, we create many organizations around the whole country. In Brussels, we did it more like we tried this and maybe that, and we try to broaden the framework year by year. But what is very interesting is that 10 years later, we already have something that is quite solid, and we have 100 of people that live in these houses. So maybe for some of these people, that was not an easy journey, because they were like, first, yeah, first people who worked with them, it was very long and not so easy. But now it works quite well.
Yeah, thanks for this. Any more questions?
Maybe then just one more question for Representative Schantl. We were talking now a lot about how important the ownership of land is for enabling affordable housing. So I was just wondering if you could explain a bit about the land politics of Vienna, and what's its role in being able to have such a strong social housing and affordable.
Yeah. To provide land for subsidized housing purposes, we have the instrument of the Wohnen von Wien, and one of his main purposes is to provide land for subsidized housing. Right now, the Wohnen von Wien has land reserves of about 3.2 million square meter for housing purposes. So that's something which is done by the city of Vienna in a long planning horizon to have enough affordable space for subsidized affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks, Masha. Yeah, and it's good to hear also that one city needs to have a long-term.
And can I
policy.
also ask
one
detailed question to Mr. Schantl, because this is also something that maybe connects to this community land trust. There also in Vienna, it's a rather new instrument somehow to have this Baurecht idea, so that the city of Vienna is actually not like giving the land away anymore that easily, but just is providing the land. But maybe you can explain a little bit more. It's somehow linked to your project.
That's correct. In the past, very often the land was given to those non-profit or limited profit companies. Nowadays, the city of Vienna keeps the ownerships and gives away building leases for about 99 years. So the land stays in the ownership of the city.
Yeah, this is the system that the initiative is also actually trying to use, because it's possible, but not for non-profit. It has to be profitable for the city to lease the land and this is an obstacle for non-profit housing. Any more questions? If not, maybe we can conclude this session. Thank you very much, Mr. Schantl, Mr. Lejuste, and of course to our guests which are with us here, Thibault and Katharina. So we're really, it was inspiring definitely for us to hear your stories, and we learned a lot, I'm pretty sure. So looking forward to the discussion with our guests in the session in the afternoon session. Thanks again for your cooperation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much.
Bye.